I want to thank everybody for coming today for the 2019 FASS Essay Prize reception. First, I want to acknowledge that the McCain Building, Dalhousie University, and our community benefit and sit on Mi'kma'ki, the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and I think events like this are a really great opportunity for us to celebrate our friendships, our relationships with community leaders, our elders and residents, our Indigenous scholars and students. We're very grateful for those relationships and will continue to build on them. We're here today to recognize and celebrate excellence in student research in the arts, humanities, and social sciences. I want to congratulate all the students who submitted papers to this year's competition. And certainly the award recipients today. We received a large number of really strong papers this year. And we have 3 prizes to distribute. It varies depending on the number of submissions, but this year we have 3 prizes, each carrying an award of $4,000. That is a great way to start off the summer, to get $4,000. It's a significant, substantial prize, but it ties into the significance of the topics and the quality of the writing and the quality of the analysis. It really does highlight the importance of really strong scholarship in the humanities and social sciences. So it's a really incredible opportunity to award these 3 prizes. Our first prize today is the Mushkat Memorial Essay Prize. This was a prize established in 1942 by Mr. William Mushkat, a Jewish immigrant to Canada with a vision to foster academic excellence and scholarly research on the meaning and principles that define tolerance. Tolerance. It's a relevant topic today when faced with yet another hate crime, this time a shooting at the Congregation Chabad Synagogue in San Diego, California, following on from the Tree of Life Synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania last year. Several simultaneous attacks on churches and hotels across Sri Lanka last week, and of course the Al Noor Mosque shooting in Christchurch, New Zealand in March. What an important topic in light of that kind of hatred and that kind of intolerance. The call for the Mushkat Prize asks students to examine topics that promote amity and good relations among people or nations of the world. Papers can be of any subject of national or international importance, but their research must demonstrate how tolerance and goodwill among people and nations are inextricably linked. Mr. Mushkat established the endowment with a conviction that students engaged in arts, humanities, and social science research would be largely responsible for addressing those important issues and that important scholarship and research. The recipient of this year's Mushkat Memorial Prize is Madison Gateman, a graduate student in the Department of History. Her paper is entitled Water Metaphors, Illegalized Migrants, and Canadian Tolerance, Media Coverage of Asylum Seekers in August 2017. Dr. Ajay Parasuram, professor in the Department of International Development Studies and History, Madison supervisor, couldn't make it today. He's in Vancouver, I believe, at a conference and also a visiting family. He wanted me to pass along, of course, his heartfelt congratulations, Madison. As Ajay noted in his supporting letter, Madison's essay clearly examines topics that are directly connected to the goals of the Mushkat Prize. He writes, quote, "Through her examination of Canadian media coverage in the summer of 2017, Madison is adding nuance to ongoing conversations around the nature of Canadian tolerance and goodwill towards inland asylum seekers." He adds, "From our first meeting last summer, I was struck by her professionalism, her outstanding transcript, the sophistication with which Ms. Gateman negotiates the overlap of her political activism, and her scholarly research. Ms. Gateman excels at incorporating constructive criticism, a vital and all too rare trait in an essayist, and I have been astonished at the impressive levels of improvement as she worked through various drafts of her paper." The selection committee members, Dr. Margaret Robinson from Sociology and Social Anthropology and Dr. Tyler Hildebrand from the Department of Philosophy, agreed And Madison's paper is very well organized, clearly written, carefully researched, and convincingly argued. Dr. Robertson noted that Ms. Gateman, quote, clearly delineates how Canada's image as a tolerant and welcoming country is maintained through a media discourse that justifies punitive responses to people seeking asylum by framing them as illegal and exploitative. The insight Gateman provides into how our national myths support dangerous gatekeeping practices exemplifies the aims of the Mushkat Prize to, quote, foster academic excellence and scholarly research into the meaning and principles that define tolerance. So, congratulations, Madison.
Great. Thank you. All right, thank you for that warm introduction, Dean Harvey, and thank you all for coming today. I am honored to be here and to have my essay selected as the 2019 Mushkat Prize. First, I would like to thank the Mushkat family, of course, for their generous donation to make this prize possible, especially a prize with an explicit focus on the themes of tolerance and goodwill. As Dean Harvey mentioned, in a world that is increasingly dominated by the rising tide of hatred, violent nationalisms, calls for closed borders, and the building of walls instead of bridges, reflecting on how communities can work towards a more just, kind, and loving world is of the utmost importance. So thank you to the Mushkat family for intentionally making space for that public reflection. I would also like to thank Dean Frank Harvey, Genevieve, and the entire FASS committee that took the time to read the essays and to find the value in mine. I sincerely appreciate it. I would also like to thank Dr. Ajay Parasram, my wonderful master's supervisor, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. His unwavering support for my work in general, and this particular project specifically, has been crucial to the development of my own ideas since I came to Dalhousie. It is rare to find someone who is as critical as they are kind, as radical as they are empathetic, and I feel privileged to be working through my thesis with someone who is just that. This essay was originally submitted for a course of his, and he acted as a reference on my behalf for this competition, so thank you to Dr. Parasram. Finally, as Dean Harvey mentioned, I would like to give thanks to the traditional and ongoing stewards of this land, the Mi'kmaq peoples. Border justice and Indigenous sovereignty are intimately connected, and I would be remiss to discuss migration and Canadian tolerance as a settler without calling to action the need for ongoing conversations on whose land borders are on, who has jurisdiction over that land, and how immigration and citizenship policies are inextricable from settler colonialism in Canada. The goal of this particular essay was to focus in on one aspect of migration, how we publicly discuss it in Canada, what words we use again and again, how our language functions to entrench or promote or challenge particular ideas, and what the implications of language can be on refugee policy and attitudes. In the Canadian landscape, language of goodwill and tolerance and generosity towards migrants has dominated the media in recent years, especially related to our resettlement of Syrian refugees since 2015. However, this loud celebration of Canada's refugee programs does not reflect the reality of increasingly securitized practices towards inland asylum seekers. In recent years, including with the 2019 federal budget bill that was tabled a few weeks ago, legislation for asylum seekers has become increasingly restrictive, including the growing use of socioeconomic deterrence, reduced procedural guarantees, and the increased use of immigration detention. Often, the language of security is used to rationalize these measures, drawing upon rhetoric that positions asylum seekers as asylum shoppers, queue jumpers, threats to public security, and drains on public resources. Building upon this, my essay analyzed the discursive elements of Canadian news coverage of asylum seekers in the Globe and Mail and the National Post from August 1st to September 1st, 2017, to see if, and if so, how, this focus period fit into this broader reality. This 1-month period reflects an increase of just under 6,000, mostly Haitian asylum seekers, crossing between official ports of entry from the United States into Canada. As I analyzed the articles that covered this migratory period, 2 discursive themes immediately emerged as the most common. First, descriptions of the quantity of asylum seekers primarily through water metaphors, so with language such as wave, surge, streaming in, flowing in, trickling, flooding, and so on. Second, the illegalization of the asylum seekers and their migration through direct language such as illegal migrant or illegal migration. It must be stated briefly that irregular border crossing is not illegal, and under both domestic and international law, asylum seekers always have the right to enter Canada and immediately apply for refugee status. One way to understand this research is through the assertion that the naturalization process of water metaphors in the media, as well as the various misuses of the term illegal, adds a layer to the way that inland asylum seekers are often perceived as a threat to Canadian sovereignty and border regime. By highlighting certain aspects of migration and not addressing others, print media is presenting asylum seekers as criminals whose border transgressions offend deeply held beliefs about border control as the instantiation of sovereignty. Thus, these communities become excluded from commonly held assumptions of Canadian tolerance and goodwill. Borders determine the nature of group belonging, affiliation, and membership, and the way in which the process of national inclusion and exclusion are institutionalized. And if Canadian tolerance is limited to particular groups of migrants that enter Canada in a particularly mediated way, in many cases an impossible ask, then the very nature of tolerance in its current form must come under question as representing conditional and exclusionary rather than inclusionary practices and beliefs. As the numbers of global migrants continue to rise, alongside increasingly radicalized and rationalized anti-migrant rhetoric in the public sphere, this construction necessitates ongoing conversations on the purpose of these categories and the need for a justice-based approach to migration that relies less on vague notions of Canadian generosity and more on the fundamental legal and ethical obligation to provide refuge to those most vulnerable seeking asylum on Canadian soil. Thank you.